Peace. Please, Rabbi Pinson, what's your first name? Menachem Mendel. When in doubt, say Menachem Mendel. Okay. Okay, so you're Menachem Mendel, right? You're Evan Baruch. And you're Harav Shmuel Shlita. You know the story. The story is that the Rebbe walked into the house and the Rebbetzin said to the Rebbe about your Zayde, der Boychik hat mir geholfen mit der ganzen Stufe Pesach. He called your Zayde Chesed Boychik. And the Rebbe said to the Rebbetzin, there is a tzand der Einer called Yitzhak Boychik, Rabbi Halberstam. And for the rest of her life, your grandfather was the Rabbi Halberstam. Because the Rebbe made a joke. The Rebbetzin took the Rebbe, she was his wife. The Rebbetzin said as a joke, he's not a boychik, he's a rabbi, and he was a boychik. He was probably 17 years old. And the Rabbi Halberstam, so Yezeda worked for her, and he was Rabbi Halberstam, because the Rebbe said in jest, Rabbi Halberstam. So Yezeda is Rabbi Halberstam, so you're a rabbi, ben rabbi, ben rabbi. Then we have Meir Shleimer. Okay, now one of your names is Aryeh. Do not help me. Aryeh. Your last name is Engel. Levi? Yeah. So it's Aaron Levi? Aryeh Levi. Aryeh or Aaron? Aaron Levi. Now you're Rabbi Buhlman, and you also have an Aaron in your name, am I correct?
No.
Oh, man. You think I enjoy not remembering people's names? It's torture. It took me a while. It's not Menachem Mendel, it's not Yosef Yitzchak, it's not Shmuel, it's not Shaul Deber, it's not Yisrael, it's not one of the Rebbeim. I'm going to guess Avram. No, what's your name? David Yosef. And you told me before SMS. Shmuel Machon. And you're Baruch Shafrin. And you're Chaskel Brad. You know, you're like you guys, it's like Chaskel Brad's the first name. So your name is Chaskel Brad. You're Baruch Shafrin. If you have a name for Nagrei Chassid, it's a Shem HaTayar. And you're Shnei Zalman. And you're Menachem Mendel. And you I know. You're Korinsky from Florida. Dov Ber Korinsky from Florida. And Menachem Mendel Fegelstock fell asleep because I'm wasting time with Bittel Teda. Menachem Mendel Slavin. And you are Yosef Yitzchak David. And you're Tzemach. Just one name, Tzemach. And you're Chaim Shnei Zalman. And you're David Yankov. And you're Goldberg. Half from your first name also. It's like it's mamish gefährlich. I'm not going to remember your first name. What's your first name? But you have two names. Yishai
Azriel.
Yishai Azriel. And your name is Turgaman. You're not supposed to tell me. I'm supposed to remember. Okay. That took 3.5 minutes just to say everybody's name. Am I a bum or a bum? Okay.
All right, you did pretty good.
I'll get better at it. But you know what the tragedy is? You'll leave my class, I'll see you 2 months later, and I'll ask you if you learned about me 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It actually happened. A boy sat in this room a whole year. I saw him the next Elul. I said, when did you learn by me? 10 years ago or 11? He said, Rabbi, last year. He hates me ad hayom hazeh. How could you forget I was in your class? And it's just how it is. It's a sign of the time. I want you to know, I grew up with a father, soll sein gesund, who hated the idea of aging. You couldn't call him an old. You couldn't. With him, you couldn't joke around. You'll speak to him today, and he's 86.5 years old. Everything works. It doesn't work. This is his. He goes through life with that. So, of course, as his son, I got to do the opposite. So my attitude is, every son I have, I talk about, and I laugh about it. So the experiment is out. Yeah, which way works better? Chances are my kids are going to say, my father's a nut. Every time he loses one of his sentences, he tells the whole world, makes a joke. We're going to make believe we don't have problems. And then my grandchildren will be like me, as they get developed. It's a minig. But it's interesting. I choose to laugh at myself. Once I realize, other people play games. I mean, if a lot of people go to them, how do you spell your name? That means I forgot your name, but I don't want to tell you. How do you spell your name? Who else was in your class? Who else is in your class? And then you start talking people's names, and by mistake you give me your own name, and that's what he's really after. When you reach my age, most people have this kind of lapses in memory. It's just the way it is. Anyway, that's what I do. I laugh about it. I laugh at myself, which I think is good. We'll find out. The argument against it is that if you laugh at your chesrenis, if you laugh at your deficiencies, they become real. Well, the Frierdiker Rebbe said once, if you don't want to have a bad memory, never say you don't remember. The Frierdiker Rebbe actually said that, and I say it every day. Do you mind? If you want to remember things, never say you don't remember. Never, thank you. Never say you don't remember. So people tell that to me from time to time. Say, yeah, I forgot that too. I forgot that too. Okay, let's go. We're in the middle of a question. I took you on a journey, and the truth of the matter is, it's taken too long, but it's also worked out better than I thought.
What you said.
Huh?
So what should you say?
I remember. And in other words, work on recalling, but never say I don't remember. The Rebbe told it to Harav Ashkenazi. The Frierdiker Rebbe said it. The Rebbe repeated to Harav from Kfar Chabad. He was a very big god. His name is Yosef Yitzchak HaKohen and Shlomo HaKohen. It's very easy. Because I have clues. His father learned by me. That's what happened. Huh? Your father learned me also. But your father learned by me after his father. So his father I remember better because I was younger. You see what I'm saying? His father, when the brain really worked. When I was younger, I was strong. I could learn so many hours. Like the good philosophy doesn't allow it.
So Rabbi, maybe it should be easier for you if you remember what he's named after.
Explain what do you mean?
Meaning, if you remember, you're going to remember those people because you learned about them when you were younger.
Right.
So you just think about who this person is named after, and you'll be able to remember.
That's what works with him.
Right. So I'm saying do that with us.
And with him also. I'm sorry. Why do I remember your name? You know of Ram Baruch. Tell me once, because I think of Ram Baruch Pesach. That's why I remember your name. It's very simple. His name is Shmuel. Why do I remember Shmuel? Because I think of the Manash. If I can align you, he's Rabbi Bullman. His last name I'll never forget. Because literally 55 years ago, it was a little pisha. We went to Farakaway. There was a young Israel. It was a rabbi, an Ashkenazi. Nikach Hasidim was Rabbi Bullman. He was the sweetest Jew. He had the softest hands. I have such good memory. So I think of Rabbi Bullman. What are you going to do? That's how the game is played. So every boy I try to have a way of. He is Baruch Shafrin. I don't remember him. I remember I never knew it, but he had great grandfather, a big chos named Baruch Shafrin. That's how I remember. And the same is with Chatzkel Brot. What are you going to do? The Chaim Shnei Zalman is a tricky one, because it's like, Shnei Zalman is a little easier. Okay, and you got to smile more. Okay, so listen, I took you on a journey. It's taken too long, but it's been a nice trip. For those who followed the last 5-6 classes, we discussed Chassidus, and we started talking about Chabad. And the question that was most recently developed was, isn't Chabad Chassidus the antithesis of what Chassidus is? Isn't the word Chabad and the word Chassidus a contradiction in terms? And I'll tell you my Lashon Hara. I love saying Lashon Hara. It's my favorite thing. I'm talking about Lashon Hara that you're allowed to say. There was a Yid who's probably gone now 30 years, 40 years maybe even. His name was Harav Meir Blizinski. There's a family in Lubavitch, Blizinski. It's a pretty big family. I think he had more daughters than sons, but it's a big mishpacha. You'd be surprised how many Enikach this one Jew, Meir Blizinski, has. Meir Blizinski's family, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember what kind of chas they were. They belonged to a Chassidus, this is before the war, a Chernobyl Chassidus, whatever, some kind of a Chernobyl Chassidus. And I know there's a book about it, there's a biography on him that I read, and that I still remember because it came out a long time ago, parts of it. But I also have a neighbor who's his grandson, and I've talked to him about his Zaydim. He was a young boy in Varsha, in Warsaw, Poland. He was learning in his medrash, in his shtivel. And he overheard a Yid learning the Chavrusa Tanya. He was 13 years old. And he loved what he was hearing. There was a Yid named Feivish Zalmanov who would later be killed by the Nazis. One of the famous Zalmanov Mishpacha. And he lived in Varsha, Shaga Feivish Zalmanov. And he had a Chavrusa, he would come in every day, he'd learn what a Yid in Tanya. So he would sit and listen. He belonged to some kind of a yeshiva. And at some point he asked Feivish Zalmanov if he would teach him Tanya. And he agreed, he was very happy to do it. Anyway, it went from one bacha to a whole group. And they started learning Chassidus Chabad. his parents, his mother especially, got wind of it. He's learning Chassidus Chabad, and that was like worse than, I don't know what. That's the biggest Aveda, learning Chassidus Chabad. And they called it learning Kabbalah. Kabbalah. Now, why did he do this? Why did this Blazinski, what was his first name? What his first name was? The Mayor Blazinski started learning, because he was a philosopher, he was a thinker, and he had questions. Things bothered him. And you people need to understand something about Polish Jewry. And I'm going to give you a history lesson, okay? Have you ever heard of the country of Spain and Portugal? Yeah, they're right near each other. Spanish and Portuguese Jews both suffered the same end. They were kicked out of their respective countries. 1492, 1497, they were exiled. They suffered terrible calamity. The Inquisition was in Spain and not in Portugal, so I'm about to get to. They both suffered terribly. The difference was, Spanish Jews suffered for 100 years. From 1391 till 1492, the Jews with the Inquisition, the Tsars in Spain, before they finally kicked them out. Portuguese Jews lived very well, until there was a shidduch made between Spain and Portugal, and the condition of the shidduch was to expel the Jews. So Portuguese Jews suffered in 5 years what Spanish Jews suffered in 100 years. And the Portuguese Gaelish in many ways was a lot worse. Okay? Russia and Poland is exactly the same thing. And when you say Poland, the word Poland is a misnomer. It's Galicia. Because there was a king named Franz Joseph. Franz Joseph was the emperor of the Habsburg Empire, which was gigantic, and it included Hungary and what is now called Poland, huge areas of Eastern Europe. Franz Joseph was an Oyev Yisrael. He pushed like Jews. He ruled for 67 years. He got to die. He became an emperor at 18 years old. He may not have been such a good politician, but so Yidden in Galicia, they may have been poor, but they lived much better than in Russia. Russia, there was such anti-Semitism in Russia was part of politics. It was where the government operated. Whenever the government of Russia was afraid that there was going to be riots, they would organize pogroms. The king would organize pogroms so that the angry mobs, instead of being angry at the government, would turn their anger on the Jews. And this happened every 20 years. Believe Guzman. But Franz Joseph died in the middle of the First World War. First World War, I don't know, 1917, 1916, something like that. Huh?
Kings during the First World War.
Yeah, the whole First World War was the end of monarchies. The Russian monarchy fell, the Habsburg monarchy fell, and the Hohenzollerns, try to say that, fell. And Hohenzollerns is the German monarchy. The only monarchy, huh?
France was the last.
France was not a monarchy. France was no longer a monarchy but the monarchy that remained is England. And in World War I also the Turkish Empire fell apart. I'm sorry?
Napoleon finally broke off
Far after the First World War.
No.
Yes.
The guillotine was in the 1700s.
I know, France was using it for a long time.
Yankiv David Yankiv.
You may not be wrong.
Either right or wrong, but there certainly was no monarch. There was no king in France in 1914. In any case, so Jews in Poland lived very well. Again, Galicia. In terms of anti-Semitism, the persecution of Russia. But after World War I, in those 30 years, between the end of World War I and World War II was a little more than 20 years, they suffered so bad, it was equal to 100 years suffering in Russia. That's how I see it. I see Spain and Portugal like Russia and Poland. Lubavitcher Chassidim from Russia. We were used to suffering. We were used to poverty. Polish Yidden were not used to it, but it came fast and furious. One of the consequences of that, I don't know the numbers, but it's possible that as many as half Polish Yidden left Yiddishkeit between 1918 and 1939. In 20 years. Millions of Yidden became frei. There were a lot of factors.
Oh, they stopped using it in September of 1981.
What?
Guillotine.
Fine. But that doesn't mean that a monarchy. It doesn't mean that a monarchy.
Right, I know.
It just means that they used a system of execution. There was no monarch. There was the Zionist factor. In other words, there were Jews who believed that the future of Judaism was frei. There was the Yiddishist factor. There was the communist factor. There's a lot of reasons why. But the underlying reasons were poverty and hate. The Yidden in Poland suffered very, very rapidly what Jews in Russia were used to for 100 years. That's how I see the story. By the time the Second World War started, I don't know how many Polish Yidden were killed in the Holocaust. It's probably 2 or 3 million. Half of them were not frum. But their parents were frum. Not their great-grandparents. Their parents were frum. So if you were from the lowest person on the totem pole in Poland during those years, the lowest, worse than the chimney sweep, was the yeshiva bachim. Yeshiva bachim suffered such indignities you have no idea. They were very poor, and they were treated terribly. And the last thing somebody wanted to be was you. So they fried out. Not all of them, but many of them. So if you were a Chassidish bacher, a yeshiva bacher, living in a world that hated Yiddishkeit, and the yeshiva bacher was the maximum parazit, the bishnarer of shnarers, you had to have a self-identity. So a lot of them became thoughtful. I mean, just when people are poor, they actually use their brain. That's a weird thing. When people are rich, they just sit around and have a good time. 120 years ago, the cool thing in the world was to sit in a tavern, in a beer hall, in a club, and talk ideas. Today you laugh at stupid jokes. It was a time when the world is suffering and people are afraid. They actually discuss ideology. What's the best way to have a good society? Is it communism? Is it democracy? Is it this? Is it this? And so on. So he had a lot of questions. And he found the answer to the question in Tanya. But his parents freaked out. They went to their Rebbe. And their Rebbe said he has to stop learning Kabbalah. And what I find weird is they brought him instead a Yid by the name of Brandwein. If you may be familiar, there's a sefer called Sulam on Zohar. Sefer HaSulam, there's a whole set of Sulam on Zohar. The Mechaber, Sefer HaSulam, lived in Varsha. And they set up this Meir Blazinski, who was 14 years old, that he should answer his question, so he shouldn't learn Tanya, because Tanya is a chas v'shalom, a dangerous sefer. I just find it so funny. Anyway, so go to the Hofim. It didn't work. This Meir Blazinski started Achei Temimim in Varsha. When the Rebbe got married, there was Achei Temimim in Varsha. That Achei Temimim in Varsha was not founded by the Frierdiker Rebbe. It was founded by Shmuel Zalmanov, 5 years Zalmanov, with the help of a few Bachrim, beginning with this Meir. This Meir Blazinski got married. He got money for Naden. He gave the entire Naden away. The yeshiva should stay open. It was a very Chassidish Yid, a big Baal Mesidus Nevi. Anyway, the story was that at some point in his life, he became very, very sick. So sick that he was dying. And he knew as a kid, he was younger than you. He knew that this is the Kpeda from his Rebbe. The Rebbe of their dynasty did not think he should be learning Tanya, and it affected his health. His mother ran to the Rebbe and said, Hab Rachmanos of my kind. And the Rebbe said, your son will have a refuah shleim, he has to just promise. The quote was, he has to stop learning Kabbalah, which meant stop learning Tanya. So she came to the hospital. Blooming. That's a deresh tezach. Right? You're blooming.
Yeah.
Your first name you're going to have to tell me.
Benny.
Come on.
Benny.
Binyamin.
Ben
Ben-Sion, just one name.
Ben-Sion.
Ben-Sion Yosef. Ben-Sion Yosef?
Nisa.
Ben-Sion, listen, know what the Shem is. Ben-Sion, your name has 4 nuns. That means you're going to have a life full of so many huge miracles. You should begin with gelt and health. And then have seichel. 4 nuns. The Gemara says, if you have 2 nuns, it's nisim, nisim. You have 4 nuns. So you should say, Ben-Sion, Nisin. Actually, does Nisin or Nisim? Nisan. You have 4 nuns in your name. Asach Nisim, Mitzvah Shem. It's only good ones. Not Chas v'Shalom, you'll have tzaras and you'll need a Nis. Just good Nisim. You see, now maybe I remember his name. So she went to the hospital and she went into her son and she said, I went to the Rebbe and the Rebbe said, you'll have a refuah shleima if you'll stop learning Kabbalah. He was 15 or 16 years old. He was dying kipshutei. Huh? He was 15 or 16, a teenager. So he said to his mother, I want to think about it for 2 hours. The Frierdiker Rebbe is still in Russia. He never met the Rebbe. He was a Chassidish bacher just from learning Chassidus. And he told his mother, come back in 2 hours, I'll tell you my decision. She came back in 2 hours and he said to his mother, I'm not going to stop learning Chassidus even if I die. Because this is my life. And she was very upset. But almost as soon as the word came out of his mouth, he started to recover. In other words, he went over from one Rebbe to another Rebbe, he had a first Rebbe. He came to the Rebbe. This picture of him had the Rebbe. His whole chayes was Chassidus. He was an intellectual. And in the 50s and in 60s, in Israel, the Freie were also intellectuals. Now the Israelis, the Freie in Israel, the Freie in America, they're into Shtusim. but they were smart people. They were apkursim. One of them said, one of the famous chachamim said, I wanted to create a country of apkursim, and I created a country of numbskulls, of empty heads, of nobody omnics. But they were bright. And he would have debates. He would sit and learn Chassidus, and he would talk for hours. Mekadev ben Asach mentioned. A lot of people became from this, Meir Blazinski. But it's Chabad. It's Chochma Bina Das. Let's go back to the question. The question we asked was, isn't the idea of the brain antithetical to the idea of Chassidus? Because the whole thing about Chassidus, which took us a week to explain, is neshama. The Baal Shem Tov, who two days ago, boys, 2 days ago was the 300th anniversary to the day that the Baal Shem Tov met his Rebbe, who came from El Ba'emes to teach him Chassidus, whose name was Achei Temimim, who was a Navi in the first Beis Hamikdash. He came back into a goof to teach the Baal Shem Tov Chassidus for 10 years. It started 300 years ago, 2 days ago. Chai El Tov Pei Dalet, now it's Tov Shin Pei Dalet, 1724, now it's 2024. The Baal Shem Tov began to Chassidus Mechia Shiloini. And the Baal Shem Tov's approach was neshama, not philosophy, neshama. Chabad seems to be antithetical to that. And the answer, in short, is that Chabad Chassidus is not a philosophy. It doesn't prove faith. It uses the brain to strengthen faith, not to prove it. Chassidus, Chabad is a Chassidus. It's founded on Emunah Pshuta, nothing to talk about. The limud, the learning, is not to prove, it's to fortify, to strengthen the Emunah. Once we finished this whole conversation, I began to talk to you about the Alter Rebbe. I want to tell you something. I actually looked it up. I went home and looked it up. Go ahead.
Then why do you answer the questions with an answer and not inspiration?
Because there's 2 steps. You learn and you understand, then you meditate, you think about it, and the thinking about it goes from the mind to the heart. The sheet of the Alter Rebbe was of Moyach Shalit Alalev. When you understand something in your brain and you think it over, it's called hisbonenus. It's a very basic part of the Chassidus of Chabad. It's V'yashivei Salvecha comes down to your heart. That's the answer to the question. But the Rebbe holds that just learning it, filling your brain with a lukus, even if you don't do the meditation, it percolates. Tanya is a magic book. You learn Tanya, and it makes you a chassid. You don't even know why. It's not just because of the ideas. The Tanya specifically. The Tanya has a power. Anyway, so I started to explain to the Alter Rebbe's Ufta. And what I told you basically is, if you read Teres the Baal Shem Tov, and you read Teres the Mezitcha Magid, even Mezitcha Magid, they don't sound like Torah. They sound like Vertalach. You can say anything you want. Quote a pasuk, say any pshat you want. What makes something Torah? What makes something Torah versus mushy, feely cream puffs? I'm asking you a question. I have non-Lubavitcher cousins. They use the word Chassidish Torah. It's an insult, Chassidish Torah. Chassidish Torah means you can say whatever you want. You don't have to prove it. Doesn't have to have any good foundations. Doesn't have to make sense. It makes you feel good. Chassidish Torah. And I understand them. Believe me. What makes something Torah and not the Chassidish Torah? The answer to that question is questions. Read a pasuk. You can say any pshat. That doesn't make it true. It makes it interesting. But if you can ask questions on the pasuk and show that the pasuk doesn't make sense, and then give answers to those questions that help explain the pasuk in a way that makes sense, those questions and that answer support the intellectual veracity of what you're learning. I went home after the shiur. I gave you one shiur last week. I guess it was Wednesday. Such a hectic week. We had Sheva Brachas. Guys, after a while, it's just how much time you sit around and eat and talk. You just sit for years. It's a beautiful thing. We're marrying off a child, but we were done. We had how many Sheva Brachas? Sit and eat and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. It's hysterical. Anyway, but we had. So I gave you one shiur last week. I went home. I opened L'kutei Torah Pashas Kisaveh. There's a mind from the Alter Rebbe. If you have time, it's a great model. The first 2 Maimot of L'kutei Torah are the same Maimot twice. What's the difference? The shorter version, which is printed second, he said earlier in his life. The longer version, which is printed first, he said much later. The longer version, which he said later, makes sense. He brings a pasuk, he asks questions, he makes arguments, and he gives answers. The way they're printed in the Sefer doesn't necessarily follow chronology. No, they're easier to understand. I didn't say they make more sense. They're easier to understand. The second version reads like a Chassidish Torah. No, has more depth. It's just not flushed out. In other words, when you read a Maimon, it asks you questions and talks you through to the answer. What makes it Torah is what you say in yeshiva. It's behechach. You have to say this pshat. Otherwise, you have questions. Chassidus asks questions. And as I explained to you many times before, Chassidus oftentimes asks the same questions that other Rishonim and Achayim ask. The Even Ezer, the Ramban, the Rashi, and so on. They give different answers. And the answer that Chassidus gives is because they'll show you a problem with the answer that's written in the Even Ezer, with the answer that's written in Rashi, and they go deeper. What makes it Torah is that you have to say this pshat. You want to say this pshat, you ask questions, and every derech, every level of Torah has different rules about what is and what is not a question. And when you answer those questions and the answer becomes clear, that makes it Torah. When you look at the Baal Shem Tov's Torah, he's doing the same thing. But he's not talking it out. He doesn't tell you his questions, doesn't talk into his thought, just tells a point. So if you're a genius of geniuses, you see the Baal Shem Tov's thought process. The rest of us, you could see in the Alter Rebbe Maimon, sometimes the very same Maimon. The way he said it in earlier years, it reads very easy. It's a nice Chassidish Torah, but you don't see the Torah of it. You learn the very same Maimon, turn the page before. Alter Rebbe asks questions, and you see his thought process, and you can actually understand it. That's Chabad. That the teachings of Chassidus should be delivered in a way that the average person sees, to use a yeshivish expression, sees the lumdis, sees what the question is, see why you have to say this. This is what Chabad is all about. It brings it down to a level where you're able to understand it. And I made a point yesterday, and it's already Baruch Hashem, I have time. I have 60 minutes. That's enough time, I think. To point out something very important, and of course tomorrow some guy will come into this room and throw eggs at me because I'm not cushion enough and I'm a bad person. But what I'm telling you is the actual truth. Chassidus, Chabad, it belongs to the Alter Rebbe. Period. Just like Chassidus HaKlal belongs to the Baal Shem Tov. And although today in Chassidus there's like 101 different shtaimels, there's so many different types of kugel, a lot of different flavors, it's all the Baal Shem Tovs. Chassidus, Chabad is the Alter Rebbe's. The Alter Rebbe's son and grandson and great-grandsons, I should say, and great-great-grandson, and the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe's of his own guy, are repeating the Alter Rebbe's Maimon, by and large. As I said to you many times already, the only Rebbe besides the Alter Rebbe who has real original Chassidus in a substantial amount, not just a few Maimonim, is the Tzemach Tzedek. Chassidus Chabad is Alter Rebbe's. And with Alter Rebbe, he created a whole body of Torah. It's a body of Torah. And I said it in class, and I thought about it after class, and it made more sense when I thought about it. The body of Chabad, which we have, and today it's in print. 50 years ago, nobody knew this existed. Today it's in print. The original Maimon of the Alter Rebbe, for the most part, are on any bookshelf of you that you want. They're in print. It's like the Gemara. The Gemara was written over the course of 50 years. The Shas, the Gemara Bavli. And then another 50 years after they were editing it. We have Chassidus Chabad, and again, I'm telling you to you how I see it, and I'm not afraid to say it to you when I see it, even though, Chassidish people are supposed to say everything is bittul and everything is ain't safe, and you're supposed to make believe that you're dumb and stupid. Unfortunately, I'm not good at the game of dumb and stupid. That makes me a bad chassid. But if not for the Tzemach Tzedek, we wouldn't have it. Because the Alter Rebbe didn't preserve his own Torah. Alter Rebbe just gave it. Spoke. And I'm sure there's many Torahs Alter Rebbe that are lost. Tzemach Tzedek dedicated his life to collecting every Torah of the Alter Rebbe, every one. Torahs that were said way before he was born. He collected them all, anything he can get his hands on. And he worked over each one. He edited each Torah. Like Ravina and Ravashi wrote the Gemara, and the Savoroi that came the next generation, they edited the Shas. The Gemara that we read is the work of Ravina and Ravashi, plus the editing of the next generation. Tzemach Tzedek preserved the Chassidus. The Chassidus Chabad is the Tzemach Tzedek's effort. Alter Rebbe's work, Tzemach Tzedek's effort. It's really true. We have Chassidus Chabad as a body that has a style, a form. Maimonim have a form. The basic form as a Maimon is usually, that's 8 times out of 10, you start with a pasuk. Because there's a difference between learning Gemara and learning Chassidus. Why? The Gemara is commentary on Mishnah. Chassidus is commentary on Psukim. Because Kabbalah, Pimis HaTorah is B'chlal Shlish B'mikra. I don't have time to give you the halachas, but Chassidus does not go on Mishnahs and Gemaras for the most part. There are Gemarim on Mishnahs, but B'derech Klal Chassidus goes on Psukim. And the Alter Rebbe is studying Chumash, studying Tanakh, and he asks questions, logical questions, and he gives you a whole build-up that forces a certain answer. Okay? So what I developed with you in our discussion was this idea that you must understand what the Alter Rebbe did to the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. He showed you the Torah in their words. And if you pay, I have a friend who's a real maven, who's spent a lot of time, he's published a lot, Torahs of the Alter Rebbe, where you see them by the Midrash Maggid and by the Baal Shem Tov. But you don't see in the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov where you see in the Alter Rebbe, because the Alter Rebbe asks questions. Alter Rebbe teaches. He doesn't just say Vertalach. They have a lot of oimek, they have a lot of depth, and unless you're a genius of geniuses, goes straight over your head. So I want you to look at your sheet, okay? Okay, I want to go back to 30. I want to go through our list, okay? David Yosef. What did the Mittel Rebbe do? Okay, number 30. If it's true, and it is true, that Chassidus Chabad is Alter Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab actually said it in Teireh Shalom. So if you want to stone me, you can stone the Teireh Shalom. The Rebbe Rashab said, Ich bin sich mishtadel, as alles was sage is aus dem Rebbe's. I make an effort, everything I say is the Rebbe's. And when the Rebbe Rashab said the Rebbe Stam, he meant the Alter Rebbe. And if in a few places I added and I made a mistake, Hashem should forgive me. The Rebbe Rashab said, Ich bin sich mishtadel, as alles was sage is aus dem Rebbe's. The Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab was the 5th Rebbe. What did the Mittel Rebbe do? The Mittel Rebbe had a brain that would embarrass the supercomputer. His brain was unbelievably great. The Sichas of the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he puts the Mittel Rebbe on a pedestal compared to the other Rebbeim. The Frierdiker Rebbe once told our Rebbe that Tzemach Tzedek was a very great man, but he wasn't the Mittel Rebbe. He wasn't the Mittel Rebbe. It's printed. You want to be angry at the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Mittel Rebbe's brain was unbelievable. And he was a Mayan Amizgavet.
What did he do?
What he did was, he explained his father's teaching like a mashpia. But he's very verbose. A lot of words. He would take a Maimed Alter Rebbe, and he wouldn't sit with a piece of paper and say, okay, he would start to read. He would say it. But he would say it with his commentary. But for every word of the Alter Rebbe, he had 100 words of his. I told you, I gave you an example. You can look it up. There's a Sefer Alter Rebbe called the Ketzarim. It's that book that's got 800 memorim in it. One page, Pada V'Shalom Nafshi, one page. And it's broken up into 7 little paragraphs. It's a tiny maimer. The Mittel Rebbe has that maimer, 20 pages. And you could trace how every line is another page in the Mittel Rebbe's maimer, in order. Mittel Rebbe would speak and speak and speak and speak. Alter Rebbe would say something very short, and Mittel Rebbe would explain it. And when you read his Maimorim, mostly the Maimorim that he wrote, more than the Maimorim that he edited, those the published Maimorim of the Mittel Rebbe are a little bit more concentrated. But the Maimorim that he wrote his own Chassidus. You sound like you're listening to a Mashpia. He's partially explaining it.
Explained his father's?
His father's, always. But
Like
it's so vast,
He explained his father's.
He explained his father's. He was the Alter Rebbe wanted the people who write his Torah to write his Torah word for word. The Mittel Rebbe was the exception. He just did what he wanted. Because his brain was so strong and so deep and so holy that he would preserve Lashon Harav in his long, long speeches. In other words, the Alter Rebbe said 3 pages, the Mittel Rebbe said 20 pages. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, if you look very carefully, you'll see every word of the Alter Rebbe is in there without any adulteration. He would keep the Lashon Harav. But he was like a fight, just gave and gave. The Mittel Rebbe just spoke Chassidus unashir. And from the Mittel Rebbe, we have a lot, but it looks like a lot is missing. In other words, it's conceivable that for the Mittel Rebbe, we have the least percentage of his Maimorim. There's a lot of Chassidus because he spoke so much, but compared to how much he said, he wrote and said Chassidus and his father was alive. The Mittel Rebbe said Chassidus in his own style. The Alter Rebbe was alive. The Alter Rebbe said a Maimed. When the Mittel Rebbe said it over, he didn't say what his father said. He said what his father said and what his father meant. The Mittel Rebbe had carte blanche. There never was a son of a Rebbe like the Mittel Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe used to call the Mittel Rebbe my Rebbe. That's what he called him. His own son, my Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe could take the Torah of the Alter Rebbe and do whatever he wanted, and the Alter Rebbe was happy. Other Hasidim tried to do the same thing, and the Alter Rebbe kicked them out of Lubavitch. Arois for Lubavitch. But the Mittler Rebbe. But there's one thing. Organization, systemizing, structuring, he didn't do that. The Tzemach Tzedek did that. The rigorous form of Chassidus, the Mittler Rebbe just took off of Maimonim and just flooded them. Tzemach Tzedek worked on making sure that Chassidus' structure and form becomes crystallized and is preserved. So the Tzemach Tzedek was the Rebbe for a very long time. He spent 30 years, really. 30 years, with 32,000 hours over the course of 30 years, collecting, editing, and annotating every single maimer of his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. Okay? And then he wrote commentary. Oftentimes, I didn't do this a lot, but I did this a little. The Tzemach Tzedek's notes say the same thing the Mittler Rebbe does. But the Mittler Rebbe says it in 3 pages. Tzemach Tzedek says it in a 6-line footnote, parenthesis. The Tzemach Tzedek does it in the kind of way that you know exactly what's his grandfather's and what's his. The Mittler Rebbe does it in the kind of way that it's impossible to know what's the Alter Rebbe's and what's his. So, as I explained to you in the class, this is answers to question 30 and 31. You could say that the glitch in Chabad is we do not have a 3rd generation. Chabad has the 1st generation and 2 second generations. The Mittler Rebbe is the Alter Rebbe's commentator. The Tzemach Tzedek is the Alter Rebbe's annotator. But they both go on the Alter Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek has very little Chassidus based on his father-in-law, his uncle, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimonim, and they are in Eir HaTeira, Maimonim and Mittler printed, but frankly they don't belong there, they're a mistake. The Tzemach Tzedek wrote Maimonim based on his grandfather, not on his Rebbe de Shved, not on the Mittler Rebbe. But they wrote it in very different styles. The Mittler Rebbe writes it in such a way that it's impossible to know where the Alter Rebbe's words are. The Tzemach Tzedek words are very clear. So the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimonim, which are we have more Chassidus Tzemach Tzedek than any other Rebbe. But you have to understand, it's not just that we have more in pages. The Maimonim are very dense because he doesn't write them out in longhand. They're notes. The Mittler Rebbe have a note which is 5 lines long. That if you write that out in longhand, it's a whole Maimon. And you have thousands of such notes. The Yeda of the Tzemach Tzedek, the Tzemach Tzedek's Bekiyas of Torah is wow. It's like a computer. And now when the Sefirdik Rebbe tells the Rebbe about the Tzemach Tzedek, he was a very great person, but he wasn't the Mittler Rebbe. So who was the Mittler Rebbe? Was verstehst du? So that was the Mittler Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek. They both said and wrote Maimonim on the Alter Rebbe. The difference was the Mittler Rebbe wrote out in longhand, and it's hard to see the Alter Rebbe's original words. Tzemach Tzedek was very careful that when you read his Maimer, you see what's his and you see what's the Alter Rebbe's. The Rebbe Marash, all of his Maimorim, I think all, are his father's. Tzemach Tzedek would take, the Rebbe Marash would take his father's notes and write them out. Tzemach Tzedek took Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and he wrote notes on them, but he wrote the notes very concisely, very briefly, so you should know what's his and what's his grandfather's. His son, the Rebbe Marash, took his father's Maimorim and writes them out in longhand. You see what I'm saying? So the Marash's Maimorim, the Marash was the Rebbe only for a very short time, for 15 years, 18 years, whatever it was, but his Maimorim are writing out in longhand the notes that Tzemach Tzedek wrote. The Marash are interesting, and there's also different periods in his life. In the latter years of the Marash's life, he was preparing to say Maimorim on the whole Teira 8, all the Kuta Teira. He just never got around to it. He passed away. We take one Maimon in Teira 8 and make a Maimon that's 20 pages long, 30 pages long. But he would take his father's notes and write them out in longhand. Bariches, in the way that you can understand it. The Rebbe Rashab is the most interesting Rebbe of all, intellectually speaking. The Rebbe Rashab, this is question 33, Rebbe Rashab. I'm sorry. The Rebbe Rashab had at his disposal the entire library of Maimorim. The Alter Rebbe's, the Mittler Rebbe's, the Tzemach Tzedek's, the Rebbe Marash, and he knew them all. He would take a topic and collect the way that topic is written in the Chassidus of all 4 Rabbeim and make it into a compendium, like a diction, like an encyclopedia. He wrote the Samach Vav, he wrote the Ayin Beis. He would organize Chassidus in such a way that all the Chassidus, all the different details from each one of the 4 Rabbeim before him, he would organize it into a single narrative. He would streamline the language. Each Rebbe writes different. The Rebbe Rashab would take a piece from the Alter Rebbe, a piece from the Mitzvah, a piece from put them together like the jigsaw puzzle, and he would smooth out the edges. It reads like one narrative. The Rebbe Rashab's Marim are very easy to read. The Rebbe Rashab once told somebody that what's unique about my Maimorim is you don't have to learn them because I learned them for you already. In other words, I did all the work. All you got to do is read. The Rebbe Rashab is very organized. He's very, very clear. And he never leaves you open-ended. You know exactly where he's coming from and where he's very organized, very misunderstood. He worked very, very hard in his Chassidus. When you hear about his life, this was a man who davened till his neshama came out, and you read his Chassidus, and they're so intellectual. He said, I don't understand, how could a man whose only interest in the world was davening write such beautiful Maimorim? And of course, the answer is by a Rebbe, there's no contradictions. The Frierdiker Rebbe, every one of his Maimorim are his father's. The Frierdiker Rebbe took his father's Maimorim, word for word, and he wrote notes. We have Maimorim from the Frierdiker Rebbe in print, which are word for word his father's, without changing anything. We have Maimorim from the Frierdiker Rebbe,
That's the first one.
No, it's not true. The first one has many notes.
I said, no, I'm saying the first one of the fifth Rebbe was the same.
As his father's, right, but he added notes. A lot of notes. You have a Frierdiker Rebbe where his father says, writes a Maimon, and he adds a few words. And then you have, like the Mittler Rebbe, his father says a line, he says a page. His father says a line, he says a page. And the Frierdiker, when the Rebbe writes, the Frierdiker writes, oh my modern, there's two styles. The Avoida, he gets into Yekishkis, when he starts talking about davening and Yetzirah, and it's, wow, it's, the Frierdiker Rebbe gets under your skin. And the Haskalah, the philosophy of the Frierdiker Rebbe, is extraordinarily abstract. He doesn't explain things, he paints a picture. He doesn't dance. They're very, very beautiful. They're very sensitive. Remember, the Frierdiker Rebbe are very, very creative. The way he teaches you, the way he brings you to an idea, because he doesn't ask questions, he talks around something. And he's developing his father's Maimorim. Our Rebbe is a whole other kettle of fish. Why? First of all, he didn't write his own Chassidus. He simply spoke. And therefore, the speech is all the Rabbeim build on the Rabbeim before, right? So if you copy a Maimon from the Frierdiker Rebbe and you write notes on it, or you copy it from the Rebbe Rashab and write notes on it, they're going to be very similar. But when you just say it, and you don't write it down, the Rebbe's Maimorim are much more free in terms of creativity. The Rebbe's Maimorim have more Chedushim than the Maimorim of the earlier Rabbeim. People don't realize it. Not just the edited ones. The Rebbe said whatever he wanted. Sunday he said a Maimon the Alter Rebbe. Wednesday he Maimon the Mittler Rebbe. The Shabbos after that for the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe did whatever he wanted. And the Rebbe, over the course of the Rebbe's Nesias, his own Maimorim changed. The first 10 years or so, the way I see it, I have someone in the room, they got to be careful over here, I'm going to get eggs tomorrow. The first 10, 12 years, there's the way I see it, the Rebbe took his favorite Maimorim from the Rebbe Rashab mostly, and he repeated them. In the later years, things changed, especially when they began to print it. When the Rebbe started printing Maimorim, if the Rebbe would say a Maimor that we had in print, he wouldn't bother saying the whole Maimor. He would say, we know it, it's there. He would just add points, his Chedushim. In the later years, the Maimor much shorter, because the Rebbe was saying Maimorim that we all had, that we could learn. But if you look at the Rebbe and the Maimor very carefully, you see that the Rebbe sometimes changes a word or two or three or four, and in those tiny little changes, he's creating a whole new Maimor. You have to be, the Rebbe's Maimorim are an orphan, I tell people all the time. The Rebbe has 200 Maimorim that he edited, which means there's over 1,300 Maimorim that are unedited. Nobody learns them, for the most part. The Rebbe's Maimorim are, they sound very much like he's just repeating from the earlier Rebbe, but he's never doing that. There's something always a little bit different. Anyway, that gets us to 35.
So how do I answer that in short?
How is that in short? The Rebbe did whatever he wanted, repeating Maimorim from earlier Rebbeim, but there's always nuance and chiddush. Is that short enough? Okay, we'll have to continue this.